All right, we will begin our Mining 101 workshop, and I'm going to give the stage over to Ian Bigley and Kassandra Lisenbee.
Hello, can we actually have that second mic, if you don't mind? Okay, hi guys. My name is Kassandra Lisenbee. I am from what is now has been called Reno, Nevada, but on Washoe Paiute lands. And I work with an organization called Great Basin Resource Watch. And I'll introduce our organization later.
Seeing if this one works too. Hi, folks. My name is Ian Bigley. I'll be co-presenting with Kassandra today. I'm traveling as well from Reno, Nevada on Washoe Paiute lands. That's where I grew up, and always enjoy the privilege to come down here to this beautiful area. I work with a group called Earthworks. I'll do a little, as Kassandra will do, a little intro of the org when you get the PowerPoint going.
Awesome. So if we could just pull up the slides. So we've been asked today to do a Mining 101. Mining's obviously a big conversation in this area, especially for what we see coming down the turnpike. This is actually a mine that is in the northeastern part of Nevada. It's called the Cortez Hills Gold Mine. It is one of the largest producing gold mines in the world. Nevada is, if it would be its own country, it would be the fifth largest gold producer in the world. So there's definitely a history of mining in Nevada. And we all know that impacts don't stop at borders. And so we're really close. So we're here to kind of give an update on what mining is looking like, what some of the processes are. And so next slide, please. So just I'm with an organization called Great Basin Resource Watch. We were founded in 1994 by a coalition of environmental activists, Native American tribal leaders, and scientific community representatives, noticing that not a lot of people were paying attention to mining in the Great Basin. And so our mission is to protect the health and well-being of the land, air, water, wildlife, and human communities of the Great Basin from the adverse effects of resource extraction. Next slide.
All righty, and Earthworks in a nutshell. We are a national organization. We work on extractive issues. This is both issues with oil and gas extraction, as well as hard rock mining. And that's something I like to mention because there's lots of tension right now as far as, ending oil and gas extraction and that being an either or setup with mining. And we're really well positioned to say, no, destruction in any form is not the path forward. So we do a lot of work on federal policy. We have a team of lobbyists in DC. And my role is I'm the Southwest region organizer. So I'm here in place of my colleague, Jared Neymark, who is our California organizer. He's down, there's actually an event down in the Imperial Valley today that he had to attend, going along with a new report that we'll mention. But that's just very briefly a little bit about Earthworks. We, as far as our policy working on mining issues, separate from federal policy, we provide support to communities when they reach out to us, only when they reach out to us, and that can look so different issue to issue, whether that's we need help finding a hydrologist, could we get a second opinion on this technical report from the mine company, and really whatever it needs to be.
Actually, if you want to go back just one sec. So I forgot that we were going to do an opening activity and we just totally went off into a presentation. So if we could take a really quick pull back, everyone has post-it notes in front of them. I just want to do a little word association activity. When someone mentions mining to you, what is a word? What is a impact? What is a thought that comes up for you? It could be one, it can be two, but this is just going to kind of help us set the stage for what are our thoughts right now about kind of what mining means. And so for people on Zoom, you can drop it in the chat if that works for you. But we're just going to kind of open up with that, and I'll just give 1 minute to that. And sorry, we just zoomed straight in.
And, as folks are getting some juices flowing with that, I think it provides a good opportunity just for kind of some housekeeping. This presentation we have we're really grateful to have a lot of time to share with folks here. And with that, we don't want to just kind of talk at folks like a lecture the whole time. So this will be really split up into two sections. The first half, we'll be providing some 101 information on a whole range of topics. This will be very broad and lateral. And then we can follow up later. The second half of the presentation will be a discussion. So not just questions to us, but really everybody being able to talk with each other. So just so you have a little bit of a roadmap. And then also as you're writing down some thoughts, just some things that I think are pretty good at the beginning of sort of an activity, especially if we're going to be interacting with each other, or some commitments. So feel free to yell out if you know any other good ones. But I know one is, step up, step back. And what that means, if you're someone who likes to talk a lot, that's awesome. You have great things to share. But also pay attention to everyone else and make sure you're not taking away someone else's opportunity to share. And if you're one of those people that don't like to share too much, that's also great. But no, you probably have some really good information and you don't have to, but we encourage you to share that with everyone else. Another one I'll share, especially when we're talking about these really important topics, is no one of us knows it all, but together we know a lot. So holding that as well.
And I'll just add one more thing. You have note cards in front of you. Our presentation is kind of long. I'm sorry, especially after lunch. There's just so much information and kind of dense. And we will have that whole second portion to chat. So if there are any questions that are shooting up for you, please write them down on the note card so that we can make sure that we answer them at the later portion of the workshop. And with that, go ahead and just keep your words close to you. We're going to kind of come back to that after we talk a little bit about mining. So, and with that, I'll pass it back to Ian.
All right, and if we could get the presentation back up. So we do on the next slide, we have just a brief land acknowledgement. I know that this has been shared throughout the day today, but just want to make sure that we're acknowledging that we're on the traditional lands of Paiute and Shoshone peoples, the stewards that have taken care of this land since time immemorial, and importantly, continue to lead the work, taking care of this land that benefits us all. And we strive and aim to be in solidarity and support that leadership that already exists in these areas. We could go to the next. Now this is just a very kind of cursory bird's eye view of what we're looking at with mines. So the map on the left is from the Nevada Division of Minerals from 2021. You're looking at the metal mines in the yellow there. That's not including things like, gravel, aggregates, those sorts of things. That's just, the metal mines like copper, gold, those sorts of things. As Kassandra mentioned, there is a globally significant amount of gold being extracted from northeastern Nevada. But now in the West, although there's other types of mines there, that's where we're seeing a lot of the lithium. And then here in California, what those pins are for the current exploration projects we're seeing. So there is some ongoing proposals that communities have been fighting for gold exploration around Grass Valley. We're seeing the Bodie Hills projects around there. I know we recently had a big victory with the Hot Springs project proposed outside of Mammoth. So always good to lift those things up. And then coming down, you can see Conglomerate Mesa, Indian Pass, and the Salton Sea. So I can't speak too in depth to this, but we'll have the contact information for my colleague Jared, who's on this side of the border working every day on those exploration projects. And now this is a map the Center for Biological Diversity has provided. Also, I'm wearing one of their shirts today. I should probably wear an Earthworks shirt, but this is for the team's buckwheat over there in Fish Lake. And this is where there's interest in lithium mining. So you can see here, there's some that show water drops and some that show a pickaxe. That's because there's different types of lithium mining. Either they're mining the rocks like they do with the gold and silver, or they're mining the groundwater. We'll get into a little bit more of that later. But you can see where these proposed projects are. One of the hard things with this is there's so many popping up, and it's hard to identify, which ones are going to move forward, which ones are going to go past exploration. How do we most efficiently protect as much as we can while there's this onslaught? And then this is a little closer to this area. So what we're looking at here is Clayton Valley. So I'm sure folks here are probably more familiar with the local geography than me, but for those who may not be, just over the White Mountains, you're into Fish Lake Valley. Then you have the Silver Peak Range. On the other side of that is Clayton Valley. This is where the only producing lithium mine in the country currently is, with Silver Peak. It's a brine evaporation project, and there's significant other interest in that basin. I'll get into some of the fun water litigation that's ongoing there now in that section. And then I'd also like to highlight in Fish Lake, this is where the Rhyolite Ridge project is. That's home to the team's buckwheat farm right here. And I think this is the last and sort of the bird's eye view of where things are happening. You can see here, this was prepared by Trout Unlimited, but based off of some USGS data.
Nature Conservancy.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. This is why we work as a team. So you can see here where the lithium focal areas are, and is very significant along the eastern, just to the east of the Sierra Nevada, all north and south, and concentrated here in these Pacific and Southwestern states.
Okay, so I'm going to center us a little bit in the mining law now. We've seen, apologies, a little bit of a bird's eye view of where these things are coming. And so that's kind of where we wanted to center, right? This is happening in this area really intensely right now. So just with the mining law, we're going to take it back to in the 1800s, mining was under pickaxes and shovels, and kind of colonial westward expansion. Whoever has the biggest shotgun kind of has access to the land. This is when this law was written. So our federal mining law is called the 1872 mining law. It came just at the end of most of the treaty time periods here. It was meant to promote extraction, promote mining. And so this is still the mining law that we're operating under today. So a couple of the big things that it says is that mining is the highest and best use of public lands. So what this means is, I know, right? Regulators tend to feel like they can't say no to a project. We've had this conversation many times, but we would definitely argue against that. But with this, it makes it so regulators feel like they kind of have to approve it because of its highest use. They actually pay no royalties to extract on federal lands as well. So unlike oil and gas, and most recently coal, now that currently under law, there is no royalties that need to be paid by mining companies that operate on public and indigenous lands. And so also, they provide no community or environmental protections within the law. There are some other laws that have been passed since then, like the Clean Water Act, that have to be followed, but within the mining law itself, there are no protections. And passed 1 year after the closure of U.S. treaty making. So, this was really a colonial act. This was westward expansion. And so lithium mining that we're seeing coming right now and being proposed in droves is still operating under this 1800 era's law. Next slide, please. So mining has a lot of impacts. That's really just the core of it. It's incredibly destructive to the land. It's incredibly destructive to the water, to the air sheds, to the wildlife who call it home, to cultural resources. It has human rights implications, treaty violations, really just to say it is a destructive process, and there's kind of no getting around that. And so we are going to talk about what some of those in particular impacts are today. Next slide, please. So this is just the general overall view of the mining process. It starts with exploration. This was great. We heard Mason talk about that earlier today, right? Exploration still has a major impact to the land and to the water. There are a lot of wells that are drilled. a lot of mining claims that people are driving out to. So it has a big impact. From there, if it passes the permitting process, it will go into extraction. So this is when they'll pull out the dynamite in the big trucks, which is what we see from industrial scale mining today. From there, it'll move into processing, which usually involves a lot of chemical treatments and is really water intensive. So the picture on the far right, that is extraction. That is, what the footprint looks like on the landscape. And the one on the bottom left here is a processing pond for a gold mine in Nevada. And so reclamation also, and I'm sorry, this PowerPoint is a little Nevada centered. That's where I mostly work out of, but also these mines will be going through under Nevada law. So I thought that they were important to highlight. So reclamation in Nevada, we actually have no language in our statutes that mining companies have to reclaim the water. We only have language around land. And so there's a huge piece of the puzzle that's missing here. Next slide, please. So exploration, I just wanted to hit on this, which is, at the start, they say it's fairly non-intrusive. They use aerial surveys. But at some point, they have to get on the ground and test the mineral, and that's when they'll drill boreholes. And so right now in Nevada, this is an old number. I think it's closer to about 21,000 lithium claims in Nevada at the moment. And I think around 18,000 wells have been drilled to test for those deposits. So we're really seeing this impact coming. And there's something in exploration called the 5-acre disturbance rule, which is basically if a company can make an argument that they're not disturbing more than 5 acres of land, they do not have to go through any environmental impact statements or assessments. So we usually see a patchwork of drilling areas that are under 5 acres so that they don't have to go through any actual review processes. So there's a lot missing even in this exploration phase, which is what we are in right now, what we're currently seeing around the Whites and into Clayton Valley and up through the Sierras, all the way through the Great Basin.
I want to make the note that for the most part, it's exploration. Rhyolite Ridge is past exploration and currently going through NEPA permitting.
Next one. And then we get to extraction. Once the exploration, if they find there's a valuable mineral deposit, they go through their permitting, then we get into extraction. And Ian's going to talk a little bit about lithium.
All righty. So I'll be, once again, a reminder, I'll be moving pretty quick since we want to make sure we have time for that discussion. So if there are things that come up that you really want to go a little bit further on, make sure to write them down and we'll have some time with that discussion to really target what information is important. But the main thing here is there's 2 primary types of lithium extraction, and this can be a little confusing because we're used to hard rock mining. We're used to underground tunnels or big open pits. But with lithium, you also have brine extraction. So this is where the mineral is not in the dirt or the clay or the soil. It is in the groundwater. It's in the aquifer. And what they do, and this is what is happening at Silver Peak. This is actually a picture of the Silver Peak mine that's just over in Clayton Valley from here. They pump that water to the surface. They let it sit in massive evaporation ponds for a period of time. Once it condenses, they then pump that solution out to concentrate it into lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide. So as you can imagine, this has massive evaporative consumptive losses. This is the kind of mining that's causing a lot of issues down in the Atacama in South America currently. And the industry is currently proposing a solution of something called DLE, direct lithium extraction. That's sort of an umbrella for a number of emerging technologies that are, the information around is very hard to access. So this is actually my colleague, Jared, is down in Imperial Valley. He partnered with an organization down there to create, really, in my knowledge, the first independent analysis of these DLE, direct lithium extraction technologies. available, and that just today was made public. So it's on our website at Earthworks. We'll have a link to that here. And then the other type is hard rock mining. That's very similar to what we're used to with gold and silver, with some minor changes. Usually it's a clay deposit. You know, folks probably have heard of Thacker Pass up Ahimaha. That would be this process. You know, there's little changes such as sulfuric acid rather than cyanide for leaching, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And in short, I think this sort of covers the main thing of what the two types are.
I just want to add one more thing, which is with the DLE extraction, a lot of how the companies are going around this is still proprietary information. And so what that means is the companies are allowed to keep it secret because it's considered to give them a market edge. So it's a company secret, a trade secret. And so they do not have to disclose what they use in these processes to the general public. So it is very experimental and very unknown about what the process actually looks like.
And with that, I should say, the Salton Sea is really a region that we're seeing significant interest in this DLE technology. It's associated with the geothermal projects down there, and they're looking to kind of pair the geothermal projects also produce extracting the lithium while it's pumping that hot water. And if we could go to the next slide. So this is a little bit more in depth of two of the hard rock projects we have. So Thacker Pass is under construction currently. It's been permitted. Folks may be aware that there was legal challenges to that permitting, which in fact the judge did rule that the BLM violated the law in permitting this mine. And we'll get a little bit more in depth into that a little bit later. And then Rhyolite Ridge is a little bit further. We're expecting it re-entered scoping after the team's buckwheat was listed due to some great work from Center for Biological Diversity and a lot of other folks. And we're expecting responses from scoping around December, but don't quote me on that. Those can always change as far as dates. And a little bit around there is, as I've mentioned, the team's buckwheat. If you're not familiar, there's a flower that only exists on, I believe, a little bit less than 10 acres in the entire world. And it's right where they've proposed that mine site is the location of this endemic flower. And if we could go to the next slide. And I think I'll pass it off now for a little more in-depth on processing. I was starting to jump the gun and going into, the sulfuric acid.
We'll talk about acid. Okay, so now after we get from the extraction process, then we go into the processing process, right? How are they actually getting these minerals out? And so I wanted to give the lithium background because with the clay operation, which is more similar to the traditional hard rock mining that we're used to, I'm going to do some of the processes in parallel so you can see how they're different to gold mining as compared to for lithium mining. So next slide, please. So with gold mining, it's been using these cyanide leach pads. So people aren't going out and finding nuggets anymore. It's usually this really low grade ore that's really interwoven into the geological systems. And so they have to use a chemical process that basically attaches onto the gold. So they create these mounds of kind of like crushed up rock, and they leach cyanide on it, and it drips down to these impermeable plastic liners. Also a note, impermeable for how long, right? They collect that solution from the bottom, and that's what goes to further processing. So with gold, we usually see it with cyanide, and this is called the heap leaching process. And so that's kind of how that process works. You can go to the next slide, please. And so this is what one of those operations looks like. They kind of lay what looks like a sprinkler drip lines along it to leach through that cyanide solution. But, there are still birds that can land on that. There are still wildlife that have access to those leach pads. So toxic for who also is a question. Next slide. And so with the lithium mining, that's more traditional to the open pit, like we see with Thacker Pass and Rhyolite Ridge. Instead of cyanide, they'll be using sulfuric acid. So sulfuric acid is what holds on to the lithium within the clay deposit and leaches out the bottom. So acidic leaching is something that we're very worried about. There's an old mine in Nevada called Anaconda. It's an old copper mine. If y'all are aware, that was an acidic leaching process. And they are still dealing with groundwater contamination. It was ruled a Superfund site by the EPA. And so this is the process that's being used for open pit lithium mining. And that acidic tailings, those rock structures there will be left out on the lands as acidic, as you know, they create them to leach out the process. So these are long-term sources of pollution, basically, out on the landscape. So, and also to get the sulfuric acid, they have to build sulfuric acid plants on site. So Thacker Pass will also have a sulfuric acid plant that will be built next to the mine. They will be trucking in molten sulfur and burning it in their processing plant to create sulfuric acid. So that will release hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide, both toxic and smelly, into a very clean air shed. And I want to hit on what Kyle talked about earlier about baselines. Airshed for this area was pulled from data very far away from where the actual mine site is. In Nevada, we have a lot of holes in data, in baseline data in particular. And so the air quality that was the baseline was taken not even within this community. But then extrapolated into that. So there is also no ambient air monitoring as far as we know of. So as far as air monitoring around the mine site to see if this sulfuric acid will stay within their permit limits, that's not part of the conversation at current, although it really needs to be. And so just to put this into some social math, for Thacker Pass, for their first phase, they will be making 2,900 tons of acid per day. And so it's the equivalent of about 290 of those tanker trucks. And by phase 2, they will be bumping up to about 5,800 tons of acid per day. And Rhyolite Ridge will also be using this process. Next slide, please. So I want to focus on the tailings because this really is a long-term source of pollution. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time. It's a little technical. And so I'm sorry if it puts people to sleep. But so it's a clay material. And within this clay material, it's kind of created a first of its kind tailings facility. Because clay has a lot more water content in it than a lot of the other rock that we see in hard rock mining, there's still a question about how much water it actually holds. And so the state will term it as dry, though that's something that we would argue against. And so the risk of failure from the facility is at a high rate. When I mentioned that it percolates through and they collect that water on the bottom, what happens if there's too much water in the system for them to collect it all, basically? And so we are worried about a failure of the tailings facility. And one thing that we argue is that these tailings should be neutralized. Don't put acidic tailings out on the land, neutralize them so that if something does happen down the road, it's not an acidic pollution problem. The tailings aren't holding on to all this acid. And so Lithium Nevada, just using Thacker Pass a lot here because they've been permitted recently. So we have a lot of data from them, but in their first phase, they'll be allowed to dump 60 million tons of acidic mine tailings out on indigenous lands. And they will also likely increase that to over 300 million tons. And so that will sit out there on that landscape forever. Who's going to be around to deal with the acid issue, you know, in the future? And so tailings was a really hot topic for us with this new mining process. Next slide. And so just so a recent report, not a recent report, but an old report between our organizations, both before our time, is, spills and failures of US gold mines. And so it saw that 100% experienced at least some type of spill or accidental release. 74% failed to control contaminated mine seepage. These are historic facts in the industry showing that they can't guarantee that these pollutants won't go out into the landscapes. And so we need to be taking extra measures to make sure that this is not these long-term pollution issues. Next slide, please. Okay, mining and water. We're mostly here for water. So I'm going to focus on mining and water and some of the mining and water impacts. And so next slide, please. So thank you. And I'm going to do it fast because sorry. So temporary in nature, this is something that Kyle talked about earlier. This is a problem. Mining water in Nevada has been ruled as temporary in nature. They say the projects do not last forever. Therefore, their water rights are not forever. Therefore, they are granted more water rights than perennial yields allow because their operations will not be forever. However, we tend to see expansions and modifications. And so, really, how long do these temporary rights keep rolling over and impact other water users? Next slide, please. So there's two ways that mines use water. There's consumptive water use and non-consumptive water use. And so these are the terms designated by the state of Nevada. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what California, if they're the same. If anyone knows, please feel free to interrupt. But in Nevada, how it makes it work is they only permit water loss on the consumptive uses of water, and the non-consumptive can be permitted over because it's still considered within the basin. And so consumptive water is like that processing water and dust suppression water. And the non-consumptive water is dewatering water, which I'll touch on a little more. Next slide, please. So water consumption, this is that consumptive water that's gone, right? So this is dust suppression. This is the water that's seeping through the tailings impoundment, anything for processing. This isn't specific to gold, but a 15-karat gold wedding ring uses just shy of 20 gallons of water. So lots of water in these processes. Next slide. But it's really, I want to focus a little more on the non-consumptive water. These are some of those regulatory impacts that take a really long time to recover for our water systems. So when a mine wants to access ore that is below the natural water table, they put in really big pumps that pump out the water to lower the groundwater table so they can access that ore. So that's that water that's permitted above the perennial yields. They put it into other what are called rapid infiltration basins, which is some nitty gritty, but they let the water percolate in other places in the basin. This is a major gold mining region in Nevada. It's called the Carlin Trend Mines. It's a big collection of gold mines. So not all impacts will be this big as a caveat, but I just want to show the dark gray with the outline. Those are the actual mine boundaries. So that's actually where the mining is occurring. And the green water line is a 10-foot drawdown of groundwater. And then the blue one is impacted groundwater still from the dewatering of these mines. So it really can create issues well beyond the mine boundary and be very impactful to streams and springs like we saw earlier with the Amagrosa presentation. Dewatering will really impact those. And I just want to add too that at GBRW, we fight for source protection. We believe there's no mitigation to the loss of a source of a culturally significant spring. There is no mitigation for that loss. So we also fight for source protections of those streams and springs. And it's just kind of on that theme. You can't mitigate your way out of everything, right? There are some things that are unmitigatable. So next slide. And I want to show you this area, the McDermott Caldera. This is outside of where Thacker Pass was recently permitted. And so you can see Thacker Pass in the lower corner, southern tip of the caldera. This is lithium claims for the rest of the caldera. It's about 5 different international companies now laying claims. There's actually more land claimed now than not within that caldera. And so if you can imagine the dewatering impacts centered all around that McDermott Creek up there, which is an essential lifeline for this desert landscape. And groundwater moves slow, right? A lot of the ramifications of these will be felt many years down the road. And if something starts to restore, it can take upwards of hundreds of years. Groundwater is not a quick moving system. Next, please. And when they're done mining, they'll turn off the pumps and that groundwater will fill back into the pit. This creates what we call a pit lake. And usually we consider it as groundwater depletion because as the groundwater fills into the pit, it becomes a lower quality than it originally was. However, the state of Nevada considers it surface water as soon as it flows into the pit instead of groundwater, and so therefore is not protected under the degradation of groundwater. Next slide, please. So pit lakes are incredibly wasteful. They lock up essential water resources throughout the desert, turning groundwater into lower quality, locking out use for other users, toxic to other wildlife. The one in the top right, they have to add solution to that all the time to try to keep it from not being so acidic that when a bird lands on it, they'll immediately die. These are pollution problems. Have an addition, and I'll just add, so there's no requirement to reclaim these. They just put fences around them in Nevada. But in California, there is a backfill requirement for pit lakes. So this is a Nevada side issue. California does have backfill requirements, and Rhyolite Ridge is expected to be quite a large pit lake.
Just a piece on the backfill requirements. That's definitely a big step forward, but I want to be clear too, and that's not in itself a silver bullet. Because there's oftentimes backfilling itself isn't enough. It has to be done right. You could put a bunch of that material back in and it's been exposed to air. It's been exposed to water. It's reactive now. And if that groundwater is flowing through, that's going to create a plume of groundwater pollution. So even backfilling afterwards can be very difficult. I mean, essentially you have this material that's been under the earth, not exposed to air or water for geologic time. You bring it to the surface, it starts reacting. And it's going to take a long time to not be reactive anymore. So, just wanted to add that caveat where it's a big step forward to be able to have a backfill requirement, but even if something is backfilled, it can still become a source of pollution.
And so these pit lakes too, they basically act as large diameter wells that are constantly pumping. They're evaporating off all the time. That's pulling in more groundwater from the surrounding area. They're basically a pumping well. And so we estimated at GBRW that of all the currently permitted mines that will have pit lakes, Nevada is estimated to have 550 billion gallons of water locked up in these pit lakes, which is about 3 times the use of Las Vegas's annual water supply. And one thing I want to point out here is BLM has a definition of reclamation for oil and gas. And what I want to highlight is any effects of development on the land and other resources are not permanent. So I would argue that pit lakes do not meet that qualification. And also, objective of reclamation is ecosystem restoration and including hydrology. So we really need to be pulling up our reclamation standards when it comes to mining because they are standards for other extractive industries. Next slide, please. And then we get into acidic mine drainage, which is why acid is so scary. As Ian mentioned earlier too, once an acidic problem kind of gets going, it's really hard to stop. So the top right picture is a picture of my boss outside of Owyhee, which is in northeastern Nevada, the Rio Tinto mine, pointing out acidic mine drainage. And the bottom right picture is me pointing out the same drainage just this year in June. Ian took that picture. Actually, that's their shadow. And so once it gets started, right, these are perpetual pollution issues. They're really, really hard to stop. Next slide, please. And I want to talk about water control now. So the mine that was on our intro slide, the Cortez Hills mine, that is operating on unceded Shoshone lands at the base of Mount Denebo, which is considered a sacred site. Up in eastern Nevada, I tried to give some context with the little yellow star. But what I want to show is kind of what happens to water when mining companies move in. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of information on here with different names, but what I want to get across is the very top left bar graph is the diversity of people applying for water rights before the mine came into the basin. And now the diversity of water rights post the mine coming into the basin. You can kind of see the consolidation there, going from lots of unique family names, lots of people being able to engage in the community, down to a very consolidated few. Next, please. And so what we also found in this basin is that we took the mining companies and we did a bunch of internet sleuthing to find all of their subsidiaries as well. And once we put what the mining companies and their subsidiaries own as far as water rights within the Crescent Valley Basin, we see that the mining industry at current holds 92% of all the water allocated in the basin. And of that, Barrick Gold, which is a big mining company in Nevada, owns 95% of that water. So we're seeing a monopolization of water, right? And also a fear of what happens when these industries do leave. Who gets this water? Over 90% of the water in the whole area basin. And I do want to clarify that there's about 260 plus groundwater basins in Nevada. So we are talking about just kind of a piece of the puzzle. Next slide, please. But this is what happens when big mining comes in. Next slide. And so what they do is a process of water ranching. And so when there's not enough water in the basin, they'll go search for farms and ags with usually early priority water right dates, and they'll buy that water. And so that becomes a process known as water ranching. And usually they're just holding on to this water. In Nevada, water problems are not really dealt with until someone complains, right? And so we actually see that the mining industry and their subsidiaries control 96% of the water that's deemed as agricultural water. So this is irrigation and stock water. They also control 96% of that water. So they're really kind of pulling it all in. Next slide, please. And so, there's a conversation around economy, but these are really boom and bust cycles. They're highly unstable. Pay comes with market, prices go with market. We have layoffs, different for construction and post-use. And so, and we do see a reliance once industries come in. A lot of communities, if they have an agricultural community beforehand, and then the mines come in and buy up all the water and all the ag, then once the mining's over, then they can't return to that economy that they had before. It's gone. So it really is only for a snapshot in time. And it's kind of a false promise, right? It's kind of a false promise for long-term sustainability and life. And bringing in all of these workers into these rural communities creates another burden on communities that I'm going to pass it off to Ian for.
So if we could go to the next slide. This is some of the other issues we see. This is not just the environment. And I'll touch on this as we go through, but I know there's some folks in this room who've done some really great work on the issue of violence against women that comes with extraction. I see Beverly. Beverly, I know you've done some great work, so if you'd like to share on this, I can give you the mic. I'll turn this on.
Beverly Harry for the record. I've had a number of concerns about the way land purveyors continue to work and water purveyors, and this goes back for such a long time with the beginning of the work that Newmont Mine was doing out in the area above Ely into Elko, and the discovery of the Carlin Trend with John Livermore. So John Livermore was one of the early geologists who was working along with Alan Coop in Nevada to try and figure out a way that they were going to actually process this microscopic gold. So these processes that we're actually dealing with right now are the problems that we've gained in the way that water is being utilized, the amount of water pollution that we're seeing within groundwater, the actual depth of pit lakes that exceed probably 600 feet, going into, furthering the water pollution in those aquifers. And so John Livermore then developed another company. He had worked together with the McKay School of Mines and began doing other work to, promote mining within Nevada. And then what they consider him doing, some of his best work with was Public Resource Associates. And it's really important for us to remember, where we're getting our money, to make sure that, we're not getting money that has been kind of like expanded. So John Livermore ended up, gaining a lot of wealth in some of these areas. They borrowed like $17 million. And within 14 months of that project, they could pay it back. And so these companies that we're dealing with, like the ones that had John Livermore at the front, that seemed like he was really involved and so concerned about water issues in Nevada, and he wanted to make sure that tribes and people who were needing additional finances could get that help. But the problem was that he was the mastermind in all of these issues that we are dealing with. And so the alarming amount of companies that are pursuing this type of work are non-native men, and they're mostly male-dominated industries. And I see we have a fight, that has been ongoing between people that have so much compassion for these lands. And so the development and the technology, where lithium currently is being explored, and that technology that is pursuing it, we have to guard against, the people that are actually studying it, and to making it a little bit more lucrative for those companies to excel and to continue to dominate on land purchases and water purchases. And so those are alarming threats to our society, including the men that are doing this work. And I really feel that it has always been like that from the beginning of our work and the settler colonial era, when 1491 was here and when 1492 happened. It was men that were just going after the land. They were going after the water. And so this is the product of our society. And I think it's really important, if you look at Public Resource Associates and you look at what they've done and the philanthropy that they want to, to do, and they say that they're really, really humble about it. You can't be humble if you have done this much degradation to the earth. And so it's really important for us to remember that it's do your research, get adequate knowledge on these companies that we're working with, the people that are saying, hey, we want to help you all you can, because I remember, some of those meetings in the past where people were meeting and we didn't realize that these some of these people were wearing these costumes, and now I totally understand what those meetings were about. And I really, really feel like Native people, we're really taking advantage of, I think our goodness, the way that we want to help people, and we're always here to help, all of our relatives, within the world. We help these people in a really, really good way, and they really, really scarred us really well, where we're sitting here, scarred with these problems, where we're wanted to move and plan for the next 7 generations, and one generation is 30 years. And if we plan it out, that's 240 years, including the particular generation that we're in. And these lithium companies, the mining companies, and all of that, I don't know, how much can you go and continue to be so greedy about your domination on this earth, without realizing that you have a really sick addiction to money, and that particular issue really needs to be dealt with, just as any mental health issue. That the mental health issue crisis needs to be brought up to make people realize that people need to seek therapy for these type of issues, because it's way too much. It's way too much where their presence on this earth, to me, would be a little bit more fulfilling if they got help and realized that, hey, we need to go after this issue with a very important acknowledgement that these men and the people within these types of industries need to get some serious help, because I probably make less than probably anybody that's here, but the people that can repay a loan within 14 months, and they've taken out a $7 million loan. They're making like really, really, really great money. But I also see the philanthropy problem when you're giving money and you're saying, hey, we want to help these conservation outfits. I want to help the land. I want to help Mother Earth. Whatever their intent is, it can never be enough to pay for the damage that they did, because that cost is just you can't even put any type of amount of money on it, because you also have the 240 years forward that you have to think about, and that has not even been calculated in these issues. And so as a social justice issue, they really need to move forward on trying to get this issue resolved. And I apologize for the amount of time that I've taken.
It's wonderful that we have a flexible schedule with having that discussion period. So I think that was just a really good start to the discussion that we'll have. And I'm excited too for, what you brought up, Beverly, as far as, how patriarchy has deeply informed the Western worldview relating to the land. We were just talking at lunch about some of the really gross language people use, like, virgin wilderness or things. And there's a lot to unpack there. So that will be a good discussion topic. So I do appreciate that. And I'll say too, the slide we're on, wanting to make sure to lift up the issue of MMIP, missing and murdered Indigenous people. And while I say, since I know we have some, Beverly and some other folks in this room who are exceptional Native women doing work on this, I know other Native people, I'll flag this exists as an issue, but as far as the specifics, I'll leave it to the discussion period we'll have for 15 minutes after this, for folks who are really doing the work on this to represent the issue. And if I could go to the next slide, we'll be wrapping up this discussion, the presentation section here. I'll be shepherding us through two more topics. We'll talk a little bit about, there's two more key topics. And actually, let me just double check since we're a little over. Do you think if we jump ahead to the local water issue, both on circular economy, or do you want to get more in depth on?
The only thing I want to say about permitting is early engagement is absolutely key. We heard with Mason and being able to track the permits. I know that's not always like something that everyone could do with the capacity, but I just wanted to highlight that once these processes get really too far along, then you're really at a roadblock. It's really hard to do anything. And so I just want to highlight that as these projects are going through, your engagement in them is key to actually making some of the changes.
Yeah, and as we're sort of jumping through this, we give a whole presentation just on permitting. That can be like a 101 presentation, so we can follow up with that. And also, I just want to say, I know that the processing can often be very alienating. It's hard to see results oftentimes. In addition to what Kassandra was mentioning about the importance for if there's litigation down the road and engaging early, they say there's lots of off the label benefits to going to community meetings and stuff set up for the BLM in NEPA. You get to see who else in your community has these concerns. You get a network. So I often like to lift up that there's all of these sort of off the label benefits to engaging in these spaces. And if we could jump ahead, we'll keep going. We'll jump past for time the permitting things. We'll just touch on that really briefly because it can get very wonky. And I think it's really important to bring it to some of the local tensions, regional, I should say, because it's just over the White Mountains, tensions with water right now and lithium. So if we could keep going forward, we're jumping through this section for time right now. Oh, right to know this is important.
Actually, community right to know. Okay, so we are going to skip over the permitting, but one thing that I think is really important is something that we're starting to talk a little bit more about, which is called community right to know. It's a principle that came out of FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. One of those tenets being free and informed. And so community right to know is defined as the United Nations as the right for people to participate in an informed way in the decisions that affect them. So when we talk about these baseline studies, when we talk about the hydrographic impacts of this, there are independent assessors that communities should have access to, that they don't have to fund, so that they can have someone on their side who knows the knowledge, who can kind of help them navigate these big projects, if that is the choice that they decide to make. And so it's intended to kind of open up transparency and get the community with resources behind them at the table at the very beginning of the process. And so I just want to highlight that this is something that we're starting to kind of try to achieve. And one of the ways is through access to independent assessors. What does it mean if they say the groundwater tables are separate? What does it mean if this? How do we know if you're lying to us or not? It's kind of trying to come at that by giving resources that the community can access, so they can have a foot to the foot at the table conversation through these processes. And so there's actually a model for this with Superfund. EPA does have a model for this. So why can we not put it at the beginning of these processes? Why is it only at the end? So we just really want to, as far as like next steps, something that our group advocates for a lot is a fund that is separate from entities, that allows for communities to access independent assessors to try to understand what these like nitty gritty hydrological whatever systems, what that kind of means for them. And so I just wanted to highlight that.
All righty, and if we can move forward, once again, permitting, we can get into more in the discussion if folks have specific questions. Let's go another slide. There, we should be coming up. Okay, we'll stop here because this kind of gets into some of the solutions. So the last two topics I'll share before we take a break is a little bit on what's going on with water just over the mountain, and then I'll end on some solutions, because it's good to not just be terrified. And so, folks, as we were saying at the beginning, you have Clayton Valley, Fish Lake Valley, and then Paiute here. So I'm going to make sure to give you the exact numbers, but and as was also mentioned, Nevada basins are extremely over appropriated and consistently over appropriated. And there is currently some significant litigation going on with water rights in Clayton Valley. You have Albemarle, who owns the Silver Peak mine that's operating there. And if you can imagine, to evaporate that groundwater, that's consuming a lot of water. You need a lot of water rights. And there's a number of other big players there with exploration projects without water rights. That's going to be an issue if they want to be able to develop that project, right? So now currently what's happening is the companies are suing Albemarle, saying that they're not achieving the beneficial use criteria with all of those rights, that should be broken up. So, not being a lawyer, I don't want to speak too in depth to that, but just know that that's currently happening. And in the background of that, you have Esmeralda County calling for a reduction of perennial yield, calling for a risk-benefit analysis if we should really pursue this. They're really advocating against evaporative processes for lithium as well. And the background is currently that Clayton Valley is 120% appropriated. And with the pending applications, it would be 182% appropriated. And now one of the big concerns too is if that gets so appropriated, the water it would be pooling from Fish Lake Valley across to the east, because Fish Lake Valley currently, without even having the Rhyolite Ridge mine, and this is the basin just over the White Mountains, is 172% appropriated currently. And some of the things that we're concerned about with that Rhyolite Ridge mine is they're proposing a change of use with some ag water, pumping that up to the site, consumptively using it up there. If the mine goes forward, it would go below the water table. One of the really important things that I've been privileged to learn about and to visit out there is Cave Springs is right above this mine site and is a very important spring system. Because of the overappropriation, I've been told that for the last few years, that spring has already been dry because of how much groundwater is getting sucked down. And I'll close on this, something that I think could warrant some deeper looking that myself, not as a hydrologist, I don't have the expertise to, but is something I'm thinking about. You know, there's these concerns of Clayton Valley significantly pooling from Fish Lake Valley. Fish Lake Valley recharges from the White Mountains primarily. And I know that there's often hydrologic divides in mountains and whatnot. But I think given the amount of water in both of those basins that is expected to be pulled down, a little closer look at making sure that there are those divides and if there's any potential for this to start pooling or affecting dynamics through the White Mountains. And with that is a little bit on what's happening regionally. You know, simply, you know, starting out is mining is the wrong path. You know, 90% of biodiversity and water stress are caused from resource extraction. The United Nations Environmental Program says that mining, the extraction alone is 10% of climate impacts. It's up to around 20% if you include processing. So the math doesn't add up. We're not mining out of the climate crisis when mining is one of the key causes of the climate crisis. And so where do we move forward? At Earthworks, we really support what's called a circular economy. And this means, you know, we're not just looking at changing how we're generating energy. We have to look at how we're using energy too, in reducing demand and also minimizing mining demand. This is a whole like week-long workshop on its own on the reasons that battery design is being made so that we can have big trucks, not recycle them. So it's really hard to recycle and all of these issues. But at Earthworks, to put it simply, we'd love to see something in the US similar to what they're working on the European Union with battery recycling requirements. If any lithium is going to be put into a product ever, we have to have a guarantee that's never going to go back into the land in a hazardous waste landfill. You know, because those Tesla batteries last about 10 years. And we're talking about hundreds to thousands of years of impacts from the extraction, hundreds to thousands of years for the waste storage if it's not recycled because it's not profitable. And so if we could go to the next slide. We have a little bit here on who bears the burden. One statistic that gets lifted up a lot is that 97% of nickel, 89% of copper, 79% of lithium, and 68% of cobalt are found within 35 miles of Native American reservations. That statistic I think is really useful talking to journalists and whatnot, but I often tell the journalists that Native Americans don't just live on reservations, and there's a history to that. That, you know, really all of these projects, you know, are indigenous lands. And this is a continuation of, you know, the same story we've always had in the US of profiteering and resource extraction at the expense of Native people. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, circular economy, making sure that we're prioritizing reuse above new extraction. You know, people often ask, like, what does a circular economy look like? You know, you could look at like lead acid batteries where there's the requirement to reuse those and those aren't ending up. The best example, and this is, you know, an ideal to strive for, is nature itself. You know, there's no trash can in nature. Everything gets reused. And as we structure our economy, that's the ideal we want to work towards. Go to the next slide. And this is a little bit of data to back that up. This comes from a report called Achieving Zero Emissions, More Mobility and Less Mining. The main things I want to lift up from this is they analyzed that if you have smaller batteries, public transportation, so simple things like buses and trains, and recycling, that you can drastically reduce mining demand. Really, mass transit on its own is such a huge thing to reduce this arbitrarily inflated assumption of demand for lithium that we keep seeing that assumes that we're endlessly going to use more and more. We're endlessly going to use more and more energy. And mass transit helps with a whole host of other social justice issues too. So I believe this is towards the end. If we go to the next, we should have some contact information.
Ian, can I make one comment there? Actually, if you'll just go back, please. I just wanted to highlight that the public transit portion of this project was only for urban areas, because there is this conversation right around rural, like what do rural communities do? So I want to highlight that the numbers that came out of this project when they looked at public transportation was only subsidizing public transit in urban areas, and you still see this big reduction.
That's very, thank you, Santa. That's very important. And if we could move on, I'm just trying to make sure, since we've gone a little over, that we have plenty of time for discussion, because I'm sure folks in this room have a lot of great information to share that I don't. And so in general, I think a lot of this has kind of come up. What's at stake? We know the values of the land. We know we all need water. And I'm not going to belabor that to folks in this room right now, because I really think, we know what's at stake, and that's why we're here with limited time. So if we could move forward. Here we are, the thank you. So I have my contact information on there as well as Kassandra, but what I want to lift up is Jared, who was not able to be here with us today. His contact information is there as well. In this region, Jared and I do a lot of work together, since the water doesn't really care about a border. And what I'll also mention at the end here is that Earthworks website, if you would interested in looking at it, you can go to that. It should be under our reports tab. Just today, we made public that analysis of direct lithium extraction technologies. So that was, I came here, I haven't even had time to read it yet, but that's just something exciting that I'll direct people to. Do you have any, Kassandra, do you have anything to share before we'll go on to a little break and come back for a discussion?
My last comment is just that I know I said a lot about mining and water, and so there's actually a one-pager up here with a lot of that information on there, just in case y'all want to take that home. And other than that, we'll take a quick 15-minute break and we'll come back for talk. But Kendall, do you have a quick question?
Kendall Noah, Owen Valley Indian Water Commission. I just want to say how much I appreciate you bringing attention to light, about the man camps, and the effects of no more stolen sisters, but I think it's really important that you actually put the numbers on there, because just acknowledging it doesn't really give people a visual representation of just how many communities are affected by it, because 4 out of 5 women are affected, by sexual abuse or sexual assault in that. And there's not a perception by non-Indigenous men that they won't be charged. That's almost like a fact that they won't be, because it's almost like a loophole that they're not going to be charged by the federal government, because those are typically the people who are, working to charge, people that do violence against our women, and so you talk about how it takes so many years for this environmental degradation to go back to baseline conditions. Think about how communities are affected by this violence against women, how long that takes for them to get back and heal from that as well.
Thank you for that. And that's, I think, a very good note. Those numbers are important, and they're very drastic. And thank you too for highlighting the intergenerational trauma component of that, because it is very real. In closing too, I just want to say thank you to my colleague Kassandra. I am coming off of a month of kind of putting my head in the ground. I just got married and was trying not to think about terrible minds for a couple of weeks, and kind of came in blind. So was really appreciative for Kassandra, carrying so much. And I don't want to claim, the work that she did in preparing this presentation.
And we'll leave you with a challenge. No more clean energy, folks. Renewable energy is more like it, but it ain't clean. And if y'all want to take a quick break, potty break, I know that was a lot. We're going to come back and we're going to chat about it.
All righty, folks. As we're getting settled in, I would just like to take an opportunity just to restate some of those community commitments, or, kind of guidelines that I know I find helpful, and hopefully other folks do. And that's just, first off, the Step Up step back, knowing that if you have usually share a lot, that's awesome. Please do share, but also take a moment to step back and see if there's anybody else who hasn't had the opportunity to speak, and make sure that they have time. And in the reverse, we encourage you, if you don't normally like to share, to feel comfortable sharing, but know that that's not required. You know, individually, none of us know it all. Together, we know a lot. Let's work together to put this picture together. And then also, one other one that I didn't say at the beginning is, you know, acknowledge the intent of when we say things, but always hold accountable for impact. So oftentimes in these spaces, as folks are learning, you know, you may not be meaning to say something hurtful, but you may say something that's hurtful to someone. And it's important to acknowledge that there's still an impact. And, you know, it's less about, you know, how you've, not in all cases, but in a mellow case, it's less about how you've made that impact and more about your ability to own that and step up. So I know I found that for myself as a white person and in these spaces. And I always relate, I grew up skateboarding. So like if you're always going to fall skateboarding, what matters is how you get up. So I would just like to share those commitments with folks as we start. And this is just a space, if you have questions for us or anyone else in this space, if you have any thing you'd like to share about your experiences in this area, if you're working on anything, because I know there's lots of great leaders like actively doing work, this is a place for us to determine what we'd like it to be. So I'll just ask if we could do kind of hands for a stack, will be great, and we'll be passing the mics around. Yeah, I think we'll do a quick introduction so everyone knows, and we'll just do, you know, your name, anything about how you identify that you'd like to share, and maybe just really briefly, like one thing on what brings you to the space. So hi folks, my name is Ian Bigley. I'm coming down here from Merino and Washoe Paiute lands. I like to say that I use they, them pronouns, and I am here because my body by volume is primarily water, and I would like to be clean myself.
I can't top that. Rosanna Marujo owns Valley Indian Water Commission. What I wanted to say was, I'm surprised that the Native Americans don't have a committee to fight this issue. I just don't, I wonder why. Maybe it's something we might want to think about.
I'm Ann Brower. I'm on the board of the Great Basin Water Network, and I'm here to learn from all this. And also I have discovered that the issues are the same everywhere.
Sorry, for those on Zoom, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat.
Hi, my name is Allison Weber, as you've probably found out by now since I've been on the mic a lot. But I work for Friends of the Inyo, and I am a white conservationist trying to do better. And I'm hoping that it's water justice summits like this that start that and allow us to actually help push forward Native values and Native goals, not just, you know, putting a fence around it wilderness.
I'm Mason Vale. I work for the Amargosa Conservancy, and you know I'm a white kid from Minnesota that somehow wound up in the desert. I don't know how, but you know I think I'm here because you know this can be very lonely work. You know it feels like we're all kind of fighting in isolation at times, and you know we're just I think coming together and being able to recognize that like everyone's fighting on the same issues, and it's really reassuring that you know there is a community of people here with resources and knowledge and experiences that can benefit everyone in these fights.
Halato Chukma, Sua Chaphat Kendall Noah, Chetasi, okay. Greetings. I hope you're all well. My name is Kendall Noah, member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And my reason for being here is my commitment to my children. My children are half Choctaw and half Paiute. You know, their mother is a member of the Fort Independence tribe. Her mother is a member of the Big Pine tribe, and she had aunts and uncles that live in Bishop. And so I come to fight for the next 7 generations to ensure their environment is protected.
Hi, everyone. My name is Autumn Harry from the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. I am here because I am a community organizer. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Nevada, Reno, which I didn't mention in my presentation. But we're currently, you know, battling like all of these lithium mine claims and grew up in the Great Basin where there is so much gold mining that is happening, and so many proposed projects that I think a lot of us are have been active in organizing against. And also, like, this is going to be our work for a really long time, probably the rest of our lives, so that's why I'm here.
And my name is Beverly Harry. I am a community organizer, have been for such a long time. I think about, the problems that we have currently, and the problems that, Black, Indigenous people and people of color are actually dealing with. And, I think the voices here in respect to what everybody has been talking about, I think non-native communities really need to step it up. We're not the ones that cause this issue, and it's that's what the environmental justice movement is all about. And so for Native people always to be standing on the front line, asking for solutions to these problems, or asking exploiters to stop. It shouldn't always be a position for Native people to be at the front lines. And so with the work that we've done in the past, it's always been a problem. It's like, how come it's always the Native people that are having to do this? And so there has to be the white communities that are stepping up and really pressing against this issue.
My name is Sunny. I'm coming from unceded Ohlone lands, where I'm a graduate student at UC Berkeley. And I'm interested in water justice issues, and I'm here to learn from people who are doing the work and have been doing the work, and hoping to decolonize my mind some as it relates to these issues.
My name's Emily. I'm running the No Hot Creek Mine project up in Mammoth with the help of FOI. And I came to listen and to learn today.
Thank you all. My name is Milo. I work as the garden manager for the Big Pine Paiute tribe of the Owens Valley. And I'm here because it's very compelling for many reasons. And it's an opportunity to think of a larger area beyond the little garden and little sphere that I am always concerned with.
Manahu, everyone. Noah Williams, Water Program Coordinator for the Big Pine Paiute Tribe of the Owens Valley, and Vice Chair for the Tribal Advisory Committee for the California EPA. I'm here today to, to speak a little bit about the Fish Springs issues earlier today, but then also to listen and learn and, figure out ways that, we could come together and collaborate, and elevate a lot of the work that we've been doing. I think that, there's a lot of common goals and some common themes that we had heard here today. And I think that, it's important for us to, for one, to be together like this, share this information, but then, see what sort of, efforts that we can have, moving forward too. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianda Hernandez. I am the Water Quality Program Coordinator for the Bishop Paiute Tribe. And I'm here. I was sitting here trying to think of what I was going to say. Like, why am I here? And then, everyone just said everything. I was like, yep. But one of the things that really resonated with me was what Milo said, is it's beyond just on the reservation, right? So my job, I help manage and monitor the stuff on the reservation and within the watershed just recently, but it's bigger than that, right? Everything's connected, and knowing what's going on the other side of the Whites, or what's going down in Big Pine, that is super important as a human being and as a community member. So yeah, I'm here for all these reasons as well.
Manahu, my name is Jolie Varela. My paternal homeland is Tule River. I'm Yokuts and enrolled there, or I'm a citizen of that tribe, as well as my ma'a, Anita Spoon Hunter, comes from Big Pine, and my grandpa Robbie Andreas and my grandma Angela Andreas are enrolled here in Bishop Paiute, and I'm the founder of Indigenous Women Hike. And my work is, along with like Autumn and Bev, organized fly fishing retreats. And also I've been organizing an annual backpacking trip for Native women, primarily from this community, to go out into the Paiute Toyobe, or the so-called Sierra Nevada. And, you know, with that work, I have found myself in the so-called conservation world and the outdoor industry. And I feel like one of my places in that space is to kind of remind people that Native people are not an afterthought. We are the original environmentalists. We're the first stewards of the land. And this is our reality. And when we go out and we're hiking in the Paiute Toyobe and we're doing those miles, that those are our homelands too. Like beyond the reservation, all of these mountains, and even the great and late Monty Ben Gosha would remind us that our home territory isn't just here in Payahunaru. It's the mountains on each side and further. So Manahobu, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Borges. I am an assistant professor at Boise State University, where I teach in environmental studies, but I've been working in the Great Basin for a number of years with a lot of the folks in this room on research about water justice, and was inspired by the Water Justice Summit last summer to start doing some research on some of these issues that we've been hearing about today. And I'm here this year to report back on how that's been going and get more inspiration for the next phases moving forward. And so it's always good to be here with everybody to be having those conversations that are so helpful in thinking through how we can leverage the resources of academia to bringing that to bear on these really crucial issues.
Manahu, Inani and Gina Jones, but I do want to honor my grandmother and use my given name, Genevieve Jones. A grandmother I never got to see, so I was born after she had passed. But anyway, I'm a local, born and raised here in Bishop. Back in 1976, 75, we had a home built down in Big Pine. My family's here from Bishop and my mother's from Big Pine. So my mother was a past tribal leader. So I kind of fell into her footsteps, and I have been past tribal chairwoman for the Big Pine Tribe and sat on numerous committees, including the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, where as I learn more and more, I get so passionate about it, but then I get upset about it. And I recently became semi-retired. I no longer work at my job of 21 years, but now I'm falling back on my teaching credential. So I'm a substitute teacher. And what I've noticed, even in the schools, that students don't know about our valley and our LADWP, because I came through that system as well here locally. And I wondered as a kid why Bishop never grew. And then it wasn't until I moved back home and taught a couple years down at Big Pine School, and they made me teach Inyo County Inyo history, and I learned for myself firsthand, more and more about Los Angeles Department of Water. That's not taught to our children, but I get excited when I go into a classroom, and then I'm only doing this like twice a week, if that. So. But anyway, it's given me the opportunity to be here today, not having my 8 to 5 full-time job. But I'm my hat's off to all of you that are here. I was on the Zoom earlier, and I just heard a plethora of information, and I'm just so proud of Noah, because I seen Noah when he was like this big growing up, and where he's at now. My heart, it just makes my heart soar, and I'm just, so proud of you, Noah. Thank you.
My name is Amy Sturgill, and I'm the Conservation Director for Eastern Sierra Land Trust. And I'm here today just to engage with all of you, to meet you folks that are doing the hard work, that are passionate about, the protection and, just the vitality of the resources and the environment. And I'm just here to listen and learn and understand how I can be a better part of the solution, both personally and
Kyle Roaring, Great Basin Water Network, and I would just echo what Amy said. And thank you all for letting me in the circle.
Hi, Kassandra Lisenbee, born and raised Reno, Nevada, Washoe Paiute lands. I was here, well, we were asked to come here, but always happy to be in Paiute. But for me in particular, water has always just connected. I've always just been a swimmer and like to be in the water. And as I got older, started learning about water issues, and water kind of has my heart. So that's what personally draws me to the work. And we have a couple.
My name is Meg Mills Navoa, and I'm assistant professor at University of California. That's what it's called. Berkeley, and I teach about climate justice. And I'm here. I had the privilege of being at the Water Justice Summit last August. Was it? It feels like a long time ago now. And that was really, as Sophia mentioned, sort of the beginning of a project that we've been thinking about how to really take seriously justice in the context of the energy transition and its intersection with water justice. And over the last year and a half, it's been such a honor to get to know many of you and get to spend time in the Great Basin, and to think about what that project could be. And tomorrow we're going to be presenting and hoping to get sort of more inspiration about how we can make this project be of service to folks on the front lines.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Schneider with Friends of the Inyo, and I'm here because I would like to see water extraction in the areas we now refer to as Inyo and Mono counties stop, and I want to be part of that.
And I encourage everyone. Ian just tuned my attention to our Zoom friends who have put some stuff up on there too. So just want to acknowledge that they're here as well. Camera to our Zoom friends. And shout out to tech. Yes. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's introductions. It's really nice to get to know like who all is here, and so now we're just going to open it up. I know there's been a lot of information today, so we'll just open it up to any questions. And if there aren't any looming questions, I do have a personal question, which is, did your word change after learning kind of some of the impacts, or was it the same? If anyone needs a little prompt.
Just to add on to that, I think we're happy, more than happy to answer any questions, but also remember, you have our emails. So if there's you can do that as well. I think it's really important too for us to, have a discussion, not just directed at Kassandra and I, but for us to all talk. And I'd also suggest, I know it came up in the introductions, the idea of, making sure we're talking too about where do we go from here? What does next steps look like? And I apologize for, getting who brought that up. I don't want to claim that, but I think that was really great that was mentioned. So also flagging that of like, if you have some ideas of things that you want to share with folks that we can do moving forward, that's really good.
Hello? Oh, oops, sorry. Noah Williams here, Big Pine Tribe. It's not so much of a question, but just kind of getting back on like the mining topic, and it's just something that I've observed of just really how short-sighted a lot of these projects are. I mean, a lot of the areas that we're speaking of, let's say, for example, trying to put a lithium mine outside of the wildlife refuge in Armagosa, where you have all these endemic species that don't exist anywhere else. I mean, we got to just think about like the grand scale, that it took for, these specific species to really, evolve and become specifically tied into their habitats. But it reminds me of one of my past experiences. I was up in the interior of Alaska, and I was actually speaking to it was a non-native guy, but he had been up there his entire life. He was a dog musher, and his issue up there was a lot of the gold mining taking place, and he was like talking about how like all these gold miners, they were saying like, we have 75 years of gold mining we can do. It's like 75 years, like really, really trying to highlight that. And he's just like, but there's 10,000 years of salmon in these waters, and to like really kind of like put it in that sort of perspective of like, you're okay, yeah, maybe you have 75 years of, making this profit, extracting this gold, having all this harmful leaching and everything else affect these waterways. And in a way it could, potentially eliminate a resource that, people could subsist on, and the life, would continue to exist if unimpaired. And I think that in a way, we're seeing that, play out in a different sort of sense, out in these, very, very rural areas, in the name of green energy and stuff, which is crazy. And that's just going to continue to be a, issue, especially, on lithium. And then I always get frustrated too with like, the gold extractions. Like, we have plenty of gold, above ground these days. And, there's always this idea that, or this narrative that they also throw out like, oh, well, we need gold for like, some of our, new technologies that we're using. But when you really break down the numbers, it's only a small percentage of gold that is extracted that actually does enter into, these high tech stuff. Majority of it's going to wedding rings, jewelry, and, whatever else. And there's plenty of that's already out there. So, anyhow.
Kendall Noah, Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. I guess I just had a question to all these different organizations, because, one of the things that I've been tasked to do is develop these relationships with different organizations that help move the notch forward to what we're trying to accomplish. And so I guess one of the things that I didn't see in the presentation is your relationships and engagement with the local tribal communities. I kind of found that missing, and I really appreciate y'all taking the lead and doing the work that we've been doing for many years, because a lot of times that's what we seem like Bev was saying, that's what we've been tasked to do, is do all this hard work that we really aren't the people that done. It was the the settlers that actually started this, and so that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak to my own experience here too. I think, I even working with my board of directors, who I absolutely adore, they're from a different conservation generation that this wasn't on their horizon. The idea that like doing conservation work along as good partners with local tribal communities, that's something that we're kind of having to correct the ship on. And it's kind of a slow moving ship to some extent, but I think there is sort of a generational turnover in which, we acknowledge this had to happen. This should have been happening from day one. Right. And so I think for us, for me, what I found to be the key is, honestly going in and just creating spaces for us to come and sit and talk through these things together. I mean, that's sort of just square one. And I find when we do that, all of a sudden we find all this alignment in, oh yeah, these places like Ash Meadows are important in all these different ways. And then we can take that and we can start talking about longer term, just sitting and listening, what are the Timbisha Shoshone's land priorities? How can what I'm doing support and reinforce those land priorities? And so I think we're trying to build a long-term partnership beyond any particular campaign, beyond any single threat, because that's got to be the future. I mean, that's just how we're thinking about it from our space.
A space on their board for people from the land. So if there's a Native representative that sits on the Friends of the Inyo board or whatever board for like true engagement and building that community with Native people, is like reserving a spot on your board for Native people from those lands that you're trying to help protect.
I'd like to add, if that's okay, just from our organization's standpoint, we try to support in capacity and resources. And so that's kind of one of the things. Also in direction, we do have tribal leaders on our board, but also like we realize that, for instance, I'll just use an example. Consultation for Thacker Pass was a letter that came out during COVID, right? That is not consultation. And like recognizing too, like these projects are coming at droves. Like from our, like tribes don't have the capacity to be dealing with all of these projects too. And so like one of the things that we strive for is, how do we take that burden off? How do we take off the resource burden? How do we take off the capacity burden? How can we help with information so that you can make your own informed decision about how you want to engage or not with the project? And then how do we support that decision? So I would just like to say, from the way that we try to do it, that's where we come in with a lot of technical analysis, a lot of technical resources, a lot of how the permitting works to try to like help navigate those systems and support the informed part of FPIC.
And there's a few buckets that I'll share from Earthworks. So I'll try to keep my mind clear here, but first off, we make sure to have Indigenous representation on our board, with that being just very baseline important step. And, furthermore, on our international work, we're working with Indigenous-led coalitions, even though we're not an Indigenous group, and seeking leadership from those places. For example, we work closely with a group, Surge, that's a global Indigenous-led group working on the energy transition. Furthermore, we the work that I do tends to be a lot of trying to make sure that things are connected, right? There's lots of disconnect between lobbying in DC and what's happening on the ground. So a specific example of that is actually, this will happen tomorrow. And folks, if they want to join, I'm, just my first day back on the clock, so bear with me. But I do a bi-weekly open office hours where our senior lobbyist in DC is on there. And it's not open to organizations. It's only open to frontline community members. And it's a space, sometimes we just talk about the coffee that we like. There's no agenda, but it's a space you can go hear from the folks in DC, what's happening with policy. And the one thing I love, for example, Kathy from this community, from this area, is one of the regular attendees on that. And I love that, my colleague, Aaron, the lobbyist in DC, he gets to be influenced by Kathy. He gets to regularly listen to her and hear what her perspective is. So I think that kind of that connective tissue is really important. And then also on as asked basis, we will work with tribes on certain things with permitting. A recent example is I worked with the previous chairman of the Timbisha tribe in December and January when Rhyolite Ridge was going through scoping, and worked with the previous chairman, Jimmy John, on crafting a extension request for that scoping period, which was granted. So there's a few different little things, but I think hopefully that gives you at least the touch.
And I will say from Friends of the Inyo, I'm happy to say that at this point we are working with the Indigenous community on every single policy issue that we're working on, but that has only been true for about the last 3 years. And we have now brought somebody onto staff to assist us with that. Joseph started, I think, in May or June of this year. But our efforts, to hear from the Indigenous community and to, put forth their priorities preceded that by about 2 years. But for our first 35 years, we really didn't, and that was not okay. And I will say I've been in this position 5.5 years or so now, and I see conservation work really differently than I did when I started. And I would like to thank a couple of particular members from the Indigenous community who've helped educate me. Jolie being one of them, another one being Charlotte Lang, and I guess I would say the third big one, Kathy Bancroft. Like, I've learned a lot from the three of them about perspective and, and see things in a really different way. So, but I'm happy to talk more about that if there are more questions.
So when we're doing this work, Native people have their story that we're trying to present, and it's really important for non-Native communities to share that story and also understand it, and probably most important is to acknowledge it. Because if you don't acknowledge it and you are coming in as a Native, almost a suppressor, because we're living in a very, very dominant society, we have to be able to move forward without the suppressing abilities that are given to our communities. And I just feel like with the work that we're doing as Indigenous community organizers, we're trying to provide these stories, and we're trying to bring these narratives in the way and the best way that we understand them. And we're working with these communities that are living the white narrative. They're still very attracted to the history that they grew up with, and they still acknowledge that history, and that becomes such a problem. And I think that when we're working together, it's really important to begin acknowledging, the pain and the deep suffering that Native communities have gone through, for such a long time, but also acknowledge acknowledge it as you're going about working your decolonizing efforts within your own life, and possibly engage in cultural sensitivity events, so you can better understand how to show up and develop relationships, because those are really, really crippling when non-Native people come into these spaces, and they have their own idea of, and just kind of like coming in and dominating. It becomes really, really difficult to move forward. And I just express the need to learn about the maybe the pain that you're carrying, and to understand how to take care of it. We have our own pain, and we're living with our pain daily. But I think there's a whole lot that you have to uncover, and I'm certainly not the one that I can throw you a tissue. That's all. But I'm not gonna sit there and take care of the things that your people did to our people. And it's kind of like this really, really horrible history that I understand so well. And that is the rage that is still in me today, and probably every one of us. We do very well to hide it, not express it, but you know, it's still within us, and we have to live with that trauma like every day. So understanding that, and yeah, that's it.
I was just gonna say, I think, those cultural sensitivity trainings are really important. It's not just something you do once, it's ongoing. And before I get into it, first off, making sure it's really important to compensate folks, because this comes with like, white entitlement is expecting like, oh, like I should just get this information and learn. You have to be able to compensate folks for, really irreplaceable knowledge that they bring to spaces. I'll just say, I don't want to assume for Beverly if she's interesting in being contracted for these trainings currently. However, last year at Earthworks for our mining team planning retreat, we hired Beverly and Autumn to provide a cultural sensitivity training. That was excellent, and I think was really helpful for the staff. So don't want to speak if they're still offering that, but just for other nonprofits, if you're thinking about contracting and hiring someone for a training, they provide an excellent training. And hire Autumn to go fishing.
Kendall, I have a question, and this is I'm trying to channel things that like Jolie and Autumn and Bev have shared with me in asking this question. But I think some of what, at least I'm here to do is talk about, what we can do to assist and help provide resources, partnerships. I wish I could write you a check for $1 million. I'm waiting for someone to write me one, but you know what it is. You know how it is. Like we're all in this situation, but at the very least, I think leaving here, maybe we could come up with some things to work on for the next year, or something like that. Because I in being down here, we all have capacity issues, and we all have people telling us as activists like don't do anything more, like you're already so overburdened. But it's just like, but there's bigger burdens on others who don't come from the places that I come from. And so I think at least maybe that's an action item for me to upon leaving here, you and I can talk about that. Put it on the board. All right. Hey, and that's the thing, you got to own up to it. You can put it on the board, but are you actually going to do it? And so, you know how to get a hold of me, but more importantly, I know how to get a hold of you.
I just want to say that with my organization, Indigenous Women Hike, the Water Commission actually acts as my fiscal sponsor, as the fiscal sponsor for IWH. And for next year's budget, I'm writing in a community piece, because I'm going to say IWH already supports the community with like food for prayer runs, shirts, filling up the pantries, doing all of that kind of work, just as a Native person. But these other organizations can start putting it in their budget specifically for Native communities that, hey, we're going to have $20,000 in our budget this year to be able to assist tribal programs or people who are doing work regularly in their communities, and start building relationships that way. As somebody who's Native and does this work every day of my life, if I can write that into a budget with grant money that I'm getting, you guys can too.
That's for the nonprofit folks. Remember, budgets are moral documents. Oh, Jaime.
Thank you. I'm just being the spokesperson for folks on Zoom. So I have a comment from Sally Manning. It's up on the screen. I'll just read it out loud too. She says, my concern is that lead agencies and permitting agencies are lousy at tribal consultation. So mining companies see tribes as easy targets. They approach with gifts and promises They hire a tribal member to be their tribal liaison. They might help with schools or roads. If these are tribes' needs, why not have the feds help with this? In quotations, or in parentheses. I have asked EPA more than once to step up and advocate for the concerns of tribes in this region, R9, when EPA prepares NEPA comments or issues permits. So far, they ignore me.
I'll just speak to like a couple pieces here, and I'm sure there's like so much more. And yes, absolutely. Sally, absolutely. And one of the things that I highlighted earlier too, which was that early engagement piece, this is a problem too. I had alluded earlier about the letter that was sent, as consultation. And so kind of by the time the capacity came around to opening that up, the comment period was over with, right? And so there needs to be there needs to be so much work done on tribal consultation and I would also argue the right to say no for tribes too, to projects on their lands. And so we need ways that and this is kind of where I came back to that community right to know a little bit. Like, how do we help build capacity for tribes and help build experts for tribes? It's not, consultation isn't such a burden as it is now. Just from my outside perspective, and I do acknowledge it being an outside perspective, but tribes have so much stuff that they have to consult on and such little capacity to do the work and such little access to a hydrologist or access to a specialist who can give them, who can be in-house experts that really help move these processes along. And so just from my perspective, I think coming at that resource building and that capacity building is a step one to being engaged in consultation, because and I just come back to free, prior, and informed consent. Informed consent is a huge piece of that, right? And so having access to people that they trust with a worldview too that connects, that is that very essential step to just informed before you even come to consent. So I agree completely that it's a huge issue and there needs to be a lot of work done, and from especially that community right to know piece.
Can I pipe in for a second? I just want to share something that I heard, and I can't remember exactly who shared this particular argument, but I've heard it a couple of times now, and it's just kind of the insult that native species have more rights than native people in these consultation or in these environmental review and impact processes. And so I think that's just it's beautiful in a lot of ways that a buckwheat or a pupfish can come up and stop a mine from spoiling an entire ecology. And yet there is also it's still as part of this Western chain of being that's so hierarchical and is there's very clear dehumanization in the way that that's set up. And so I think that's something to think about as environmental organizations. And Noah just nudged me to bring up something that I'd love to just bring to everyone's attention and see if anyone has thoughts about this. So a friend of mine and I were in the Fish Lake Valley recently, and we were at the hot springs, which are apparently a result of mining exploration. They're not hot springs, they're hot wells. So yeah, if you pierce the aquifer and Anyway, so we were out there, and it is a place I care about. And in the Esmeralda market, there was a weird poster high up, and I wonder, you're nodding already, but it's, for those who aren't familiar, it was a sort of pseudo old school Western poster that says missing, kind of like a wanted ad. And it says Teams buckwheat, low growing plant on rocky soils, woody base and fuzzy leaves. If seen, note location and call 775-826-8822. Do not attempt to collect $5,000 reward. So I guess what I want to say is that it's scary to see that poster because I don't know what it means, and it could be several things. A couple people I've mentioned it to say it could be seed collecting. It could be, a watchdog trying to do better monitoring, or it could very well be a mining company or their agents looking for populations of these plants, either to destroy or in order to maybe use as a bioindicator for the presence of these minerals. So that was just one of those experiences of just seeing that and feeling like we're in a wild west of kind of dangerous, mysterious dealings. And it's disappointing to see that there aren't better processes and accountability, and that we're still using 1872 mining law as the rule of the land. Not that there's anything wrong with things that have stood the test of time, but 1872 is not a year that I would like to model our whole society based on. Yes, I'd love some background on that poster.
Yeah, so, it's for the Teams buckwheat, which is the primary thing stopping that mine, because the Endangered Species Act really has the most teeth out of any of our environmental laws. And, really appreciate the work of Center for Biological Diversity and getting emergency listing for that species. And we see those endemics all over. We heard about ash meadows. Up at Pahimaha at Thacker Pass, there's an endemic spring snail. It could have been a very similar thing, but no organization that has the skill and capacity took that on to get emergency listing to try to stop the Thacker mine. But these endangered species are all over. And, that company, what they've done, my understanding is that this posters are from the company or agents of it. It's Ioneer. It's an Australian company. And they want to find, what they'll say is they want to find the plant population somewhere else. So they can say it's okay to destroy this one. A fear is that it will promote wrongdoing for folks in the community, seeing that this plant is considered a problem for the company. So they're not directly advocating for that, but that is a concern, seeing those types of posters. And furthermore, about, I believe it was 2 years ago, a significant portion of that plant population was destroyed. I know folks nodding the head may know the specific percentage. I don't want to it was up around a half or more. But a large amount of those plants were destroyed. Some folks thought that it was, human wrongdoing. And then a little background to that, Ioneer had been working with UNR to fund research to try to relocate these plants somewhere else. And UNR came in and said, oh, these were rodents that destroyed all of these plants. I'm not a botanist. I'm not going to say conclusively either way. I will say I think it's really strange for a bunch of rodents to destroy most of the plant population and not poop once. And anyways, that happened, and UNR, said that it was rodents, and that's how it stands now. So there's this whole background of kind of wrongdoing, and furthermore, with greenwashing, the company is telling their investors and putting out statements that they are the environmental champions of the buckwheat because they have spent more money to save the buckwheat than anyone else. So that's a little background.
I just want to add one more thing that I want to highlight that you said earlier that I think is a really important point, and it comes back to why our permitting system needs to change so badly to include community. And I think you highlighted it so well. How do these species have more of a say over indigenous communities whose lands they've been stewarding for time immemorial. So unfortunately, it's one of the biggest tools in our toolboxes, kind of in the environmental, like nonprofit world, because it does have such teeth. But there's absolutely a change that needs to happen there, right? Where there needs to be other considerations that need to come up to this level of consideration as well. So just wanted to give space to that. Thank you. Yeah, I will give just like one of our most recent examples is conversations with the Paiute tribe. So they're dealing right now with the cleanup of the Anaconda mine, but there's also a proposed mine coming in on the other side of the valley called the Hudbay, proposed by Hudbay. And so like they're starting their consultation process, and we had a meeting with the Paiute tribe to be like, hey, do you know that this is coming down the turnpike? And that's when we found out that they lost their entire environmental department. And so they have the chairman just trying to run all of the things. And so that's kind of where like we were like, okay, this is a capacity issue. Like, how can we help with information through what would have maybe been the environmental department to engage in this incoming project? But thank you so much for highlighting that, because that's the thing. It's an assumption that has to also actually have a conversation first.
I have a problem with the team's buckwheat. The actual naming of it. So a few years ago, when I was still organizing, well, I'm still organizing, but I set up a meeting with Jerry Teens, who was Department of Biology staff member, and he was the one that located the team's buckwheat within Rhyolite Ridge. So there was myself, Ian, and who was the other person that went with us, Ian? Yeah, Chelsea Han. So she ended up writing her compilation of what happened at that meeting. When we met with Jerry, he didn't seem to be very concerned about really talking about it, and he really didn't seem too concerned about its plight in the future of whether it was going to survive. He was very concerned about its namesake. And I think that one of the things that needs to happen is that name needs to be stripped because the Department of Biology over at the University of Nevada, Reno is not stepping in to make sure that that plant is protected. So the university and the academia for I guess maybe even throughout the nation should be involved in these, whatever they state is conservation, that these areas have to be taken care of, and they have to be protected, and he didn't have any reason to protect it. So when I led a camp out over at Rhyolite Ridge a few weeks ago, we met with a few indigenous people. There was probably at least 20 people that camped out with us, and we went to Rhyolite Ridge, and we learned a whole lot about the Fish Lake Valley. And it wasn't my voice. I wasn't, directing. We were listening to the Native people who are connected to those lands. And we had just come from visiting the Silver Peak lithium mine as well. But I remember Joe Kennedy, the Timbisha tribal member, stated that there has to be ongoing knowledge that is being sought to look for the name of that particular plant, so then it can be replaced by teams, and to remove Jerry Team from the ownership of that name, as far as the common name for that, other than the scientific nomenclature.
So folks can feel free to respond, but I just wanted to peek my head in as we come near the end of the time. Just as a reminder, if you're one of those people who has a difficult time speaking, but you want to share something, just an opportunity to make sure that you have, some space to be heard. And wanted to have that reminder once again. It's not required to speak, but just want to be intentional in making sure there's space for folks that have a little bit more difficulty speaking up.
This goes way beyond what we're talking about, but I've always been bothered with the issue of mining, that these mining companies are not even American, much less tribal.
I know when you guys went to the EPA conference, there was that lawyer that got up and talked in the very beginning, and she was telling us about the history and the facts and a certain date as one thing that we really should be focusing on, that time and date, and how we could change history, or that could be the key. Do you guys remember any of that? Okay. So
I just wanted to add, as we're thinking about organizing and also trying to build like relationships with different organizations, I think it's also really important that we're doing our research to see exactly who these organizations are getting their funding from. Because there are not even just orgs, but like people in office, right? Politicians who are receiving money directly from mining corporations or mining lobbyists. And this comes up a lot within our work in Nevada. But we have Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who, how long has she been in office now? 8 years or 7? Okay. So yeah, she, she's been in office since 2016, and she does a lot of work, or claims to do a lot of work with like missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and is like very proud about her work with the Not Invisible Act and the Savannas Act. And those are all really important. But meanwhile, she's, stating that she cares about this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and then she's accepting money from the mining corporations, and she's in support of increased mining, lithium, gold, any type of mining within the state of Nevada. And so that's a huge contradiction. And I've even said to her face, you can't claim to care about Indigenous peoples while you're also actively supporting and making it easier for the mining industry to come in and to continue desecrating our homelands. And like that cycle of violence just continues. And another thing, just with the work that we're doing with our cleanups as well. And, you know, there was an organization when we first started because we needed support, you know, and it's like, well, let's connect with orgs in the Reno area who have trash grabbers, who have access to sharps containers, all these things, who do cleanups within the Truckee Meadows. And there was one org that we contacted and we're like, hey, we're doing our first cleanup. We need support. Do you have supplies we can borrow? And so they let us borrow supplies. And maybe a few weeks later, they had posted a flyer and they're like, oh, we're doing this cleanup in Reno. And then you go to their website and you see that the Nevada mining industry is directly supporting their cleanups. And then when you really think about it, it's like, okay, they're cleaning up this, you know, this area that's located in like a rich neighborhood in Reno. There's no trash. It's like pristine already, you know, and they're cleaning up this area while accepting money from like the highest polluter, and you know, Nevada Mining, who is the biggest generator of waste within the state of Nevada. So we have to be really careful with who we're building partnerships with and really asking these critical questions, and doing our research to ensure that we're not also engaging with folks who are being hypocritical, you know, and who are receiving money from the mining industry.
Thank you so much. You said it. You said it all. That's exactly what I was hoping to say. And I wanted to just share one other thing that Sally Manning brought to my attention, which is that at the Earth Day event at Big Pine, one of the people who had donated prizes for that Earth Day competition was Ioneer. And, you know, no one knew, but that was like, oh, you know, a $50 Amazon gift card or whatever it was. And just like how sickening that is, because, you know, it's just taking advantage of people and, you know, building some sort of it's taking advantage. And then I guess the other thing I wanted to just say, and just what resonated a lot about what you were saying about the misnaming of the buckwheat and the inability and inaction of the University of Nevada researchers was just thinking about their funding. You know, I know they've got this huge school of mines, and just like, again, thinking about how by accepting money from certain interests, we can be silenced too, right? Like, just thinking about him, he's probably worried about, you know, losing his job or losing the, and I'm not saying that that's noble. I'm just thinking it's really frustrating to see how these systems are so deeply entrenched.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to talk about how the company wanting to mine Thacker Pass, having a conversation with Kathy a while ago about how they wanted to create a scholarship for a Native person there, and how just like kind of insidious that is like, well, we want to, you know, set a Native person up and get them a $10,000 scholarship while desecrating your lands. And you know, and in my head, it also takes us as Native people to encourage our tribal council leaders or whoever to, in my head at that time, I was like, hell no. I was like, I can raise $10,000 and we'll have our own scholarship. I mean, which we've had, you know, in honor of Harry Williams. So as Native people, when these entities come into our communities and want to desecrate our homelands and then give us money as like some kind of weird payment, it's also up to us to be like, no, like we don't need to do that. We don't need to accept that. And I know it sucks because, we have needs and we have things that we don't receive because of ongoing colonization and the occupation of our lands. But to just try to encourage one another not to fall for that shit, And so it never happened. But at the time, I was like, no, we're going to raise our own money and we're going to create a scholarship. We don't need their money. So just as Native people in the room, which I know all of these people are probably already doing that, is to just like, we really have to encourage our community members to like see through that. It's really important.
Pioneer gave out like 11 or 12 turkeys last year. So that's a place to go if you want a turkey. So we have to be really careful about that. But I think one of the things, like with the T-shirt that Ian is wearing, we should get something that we should have a contest going and get some Native artists to build a T-shirt for the Native name of that, and start reclaiming that buckwheat for its own Native name, the Native name that was given to it.
Can I add something really quick? Just to finish my story too. So after we found out that this one organization was receiving money from the mining industry, we cut off all ties and we let them know, like, we're not going to work with you because you're receiving this money. And we went and got our own supplies. We don't rely on anybody anymore for those things. And then just to add to what Jolie said, I'm not Western Shoshone. I'm not from that community, but the mining industry, that is their tactic, is to target Indigenous communities to see what their needs are. But they're funding language revitalization efforts in Western Shoshone territory, and it's really sad to see. But also, you can't place blame on those communities for trying to get support for those really important things, but it's like that's just their strategy, that's their tactic, that's how they get support, is trying to provide money for things like language revitalization, even though they continue to desecrate homelands and are part of this continuation of removal of Indigenous peoples from those areas.
And I was just going to tie all of that back to the water, because just like what you guys were discussing, LADWP does the same thing. They offer scholarships, they offer employment opportunities. Meanwhile, they are just devastating the ecosystems and the communities of the area. And it just, I thought, ties up really nicely how this colonial mindset, extraction, resource colony mindset, whether it's gold, lithium, water, whatever, it's all devastating, and they all use the same tactics.
So I was just gonna say, Sandra will step right back in. She just had to use the restroom, but I know she'll have to be running soon. I'm able to linger a little bit longer and hang out and talk with folks. This is a really good conversation. Although we've hit the time, we don't want to stop that. So I guess it's really up to the folks with the cultural center, like Friends of the Inyo hosting, when we stop. But just wanted to name that. And then I will mention briefly too, going off what Beverly was saying with Jerry Team and UNR, another area to look. In Nevada, it's written into the state constitution that one of the primary functions of UNR is to promote mining. So constitutionally, UNR cannot oppose mining. I just let them know you're going to be.
I missed whatever that was, but I wanted to add really quickly about education. And one of the pieces that you brought up earlier, which was who's spending the money in our education systems and why a lot of the knowledge is not how people didn't know about LAWP and Bishop growing and that until later. we have the same problem. The mining industry has their teeth in all of our education systems as well. So there is a reason why these conversations are not happening, you know, in places of education too. So I just wanted to kind of, and UNR receives a lot of money from the mining industry, right? So there's a reason why.
Wow, that's tough. We've heard so much from so many folks, and it's beautiful. I could stay here, a lot longer and just listen. And, but I just wanted to ask a question, in that vein is like, what can we do? And I just want to hear from folks of like any issue that was discussed today. I mean, what's an action item to go away from here? Like, that's number one. That's number one, right? Is there a collective action? How do we take the energy that we had today and do something else?
And I don't know, I don't want to put things on other folks' plates as far as work, but I really appreciate Friends of the Inyo for organizing this. I'm wondering too, if like for folks that participated, if there's a plan for like a debrief or, it doesn't have to be like stressed. And that could be a great place for us to kind of marinate on some of what we've thought about and come ready to like set some plans.
That can be done moving forward is I know in the past the Water Commission did like the Water Justice Summits. I went to the one here, the one at Convict Lake, the one at the Alan Spoonhead Memorial Gym. So these have been happening prior to these last two, but they were more Indigenous based. Is maybe, when it comes to nonprofits, writing in their funding is like giving us support and being able to do more of those things and helping us create those spaces to where we can go in there and do that. And another thing that I think about a lot is like accessibility and language. Like it could be somebody who has ADHD also is like coming into this space can be pretty overwhelming. I'm like, what are they talking about? What does this mean? Like, and that's a reality for a lot of people. So like finding ways to make these spaces like more understandable as just like your average Native person that's here. So like just thinking about the language. I mean, and I know that it's meant to be that way. Like the kind of language that's used in science and used in like mining and all of this is meant to exclude us. So just finding a way to make it easier for our communities to understand and also supporting spaces where we can come in as a community, maybe just us, where we feel more comfortable around Native people and have that be one of our spaces too, and as well as coming into these spaces and being here. So like supporting those spaces and then also working a lot on your language when you're coming into Native communities and talking about these very important issues in a way that's more understandable for us.
To do a dance. All right. Advocate for FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent and tribal consultation before proceeding with a mining project. Absolutely, yes. I think that's one of our really big action items that, we all need to be a part of, even if it does seem hopeless.
Is an action item when we leave here, is it like, to whom would we send that letter? If we were to write a letter to some person in power, to whom would we send it? What would it say? Who would sign on? What do we do? I mean, is that something that we want to do? Right? A person in power may throw it in the trash can, but at least we take the time, put it together, think about it. And we could probably, get a little press.
So I think we'll actually end it there, but with a final thought, which was that last year,
If I could just share one more thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead, Noah.
This is always a difficult sort of answer to. It's always like, what else can we sort of do? And, I don't know if I'm like, usually just preaching to the choir here, but, just keep continuing to be in support, for a lot of these initiatives. I mean, like it was said before, tribal folks are always on the forefronts and the front lines, on these sort of issues. And a lot of it, I think, has to do, at least in our case, is an issue of education. And this is something that I do bring up when I'm like speaking to folks down in Los Angeles, because majority of the people do not know where their water would come from and still do not realize what the level would affect. Another thing that I would say too is like, we're disenfranchised communities, that people do have access to people who, are really familiar with water law. I think that would be really important. Things with like water rights, tribal water rights, for rated water. I mean, other researchers, for different, projects that we have going on. For example, with the Hunava core collection, people who have, a deep understanding that could, help gather us some more evidence. And then just continuing to have these conversations and continuing to open up these spaces for tribal people to be able to share, what we're talking about, because there is a lack of representation and a lack of access and unfortunately leadership. I mean, not in our sense of leadership, but I mean, tribal people being in a position of leadership to be able to actually, have a say of what's going on. The FPIC, I mean, I've still yet to really see that, see that like a really good core action of that take place, in real time. And education, education, especially, on the water rights issue, is just going to continue to be important, because this isn't taught. And, there's a reason for that, I think. And if people, do have access to resources, willing to donate, I mean, there's a wide range, I think, of ways of that I think it's going to come down to the individual of how, involved that they would like to get, or what sort of specialties that they might have or possess that could be to the benefit. And if you don't know, reach out, ask. There may be some things that, haven't been said or haven't been covered, or ideas that we have in mind, but maybe we don't have the expertise or capacities to do so. But, being there and being a lending hand and being an ally, for a lot of these tribal folks is going to be, really, really, really important. And so I leave it at that.
Support. Planning, and if they did have if they just had a meeting to work on some of these issues, for a week or so, and start developing the goal of a tribal compact that can come together with Lone Pine, Big Pine, Bishop, Benton, and then Timbishaw, Mona Lake. They would have a really nice compact. And so that should be the goal, because they're the ones that are allowed to talk about sovereignty, about these government to government relationships, the voice of indigenous people, the leaders of those tribes are the most important, that need to be very, very educated on the processes that follow NEPA, the EIS process, and then also just being able to understand what are the what the needs of their people are, and having that public conversation with them, and asking them, how important are the pupfish to you? I mean, those were important questions. And how where do we need to be growing out? So it's that tribal position that is going to make a difference. The grassroots organizations that we have can help in some regard. And all of these organizations, the 501c3s, can help in some regard. But the fact is that any letters that get signed off, they get signed off by tribal leaders, and that's where a lot of organizing needs to be done for them to become a little bit more efficient.
Well, and thank you, Kyle, for that question. And I really don't have an answer for that right now at this point. A lot of times what I like to do is engage with the community and see what their needs are before I come back to an answer to that type of question. But that's the type of question that a lot of these organizations need to have. What can we do to support you? We need more of that, and in our communities, what ways can we support you? What resources do you need? How can we support you? We need more questions like that, But another thing too is that's how this, we had the framework already built from last year's summit, and we have done it, I think in 2017, they had a Water Justice Summit then as well. And we was approached, Terry was approached by Friends of the Inyo and said, we want to do this again. How can we support you to ensure that this comes alive, comes to fruition again? And so that's how this came out, was through the support of Friends of the Inyo and Eastern Sierra Land Trust, because we just didn't have the capacity at that time to be able to do all this heavy lifting on our own. And so we took a more of a, well, I don't like to say backdoor because I was involved in the process as well too, but we was there in collaboration with them, and so I think, working in collaboration and asking, how can we support you? How can we help you bring this to fruition is an important question that we could ask ourselves.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of the cultural center and the fact that they still got to clean up this room after us and not keep them too long. But I want to say that last year we talked about getting a resource library together, whether that was on something like Google Drive or Slack or Discord. And we didn't end up figuring out what that platform would look like, but that is something that I want us to keep thinking about as we go through this summit, because that is something where we could share things like all of the documents that rule our lives in this bureaucracy, and various trainings, whether they're cultural sensitivity things, or, Kyle was talking about if as a follow-up to this, maybe we had consistent trainings throughout the year, like NEPA trainings that we could get together on and make sure that tribal leadership was getting in on these things. So I think one of our big action items is, how can we create a network going forward that will allow these things to come to fruition and allow us to support larger things, like making sure, tribal leadership is supported, whether it's from nonprofits and intertribally. And with that, I will remind everyone that there will be a tribal leadership and environmental staff roundtable tomorrow. So put a pin in your conversations today, because we're opening them right back up tomorrow. And we'll be at the Bishop Saracoso College campus for 9 a.m. for breakfast again, 10 a.m. for the conversation starting. So we have lots of time to mingle as well. And I hope when your heads hit the pillow tonight, maybe you get some good dreams about what our next action items would be and what these answers are.